Welcome back. Our panel now this morning is the media doing its part to advance the analytics discussion? And I don't think we have a better group to discuss this than up here. A lot of familiar faces. You know Brian Kenny from MLB Network. Jon Sciambi's back. He's from ESPN. Eno Sarris from The Athletic. And a last-minute addition, and we're very happy to have this addition, is Rob Neyer, who's in town. So if we get a big pen, and I will hand it over to Brian and get started.
All right. Thank you, Mark. I get my voice is a little shot.
Yes, we are, by the way, Mark. We are doing our part. I'd like to start with that.
Done.
Good night, everybody.
Well, I guess we're good. Answered that question. Maybe I'll do a little more listening than talking. Couldn't hurt. My voice is still a little shot, but I will start off and let me go over to Rob, who is more in the, and take this a good way, in the pioneer status than perhaps we are, because you were doing this pretty early, not as early as some in the audience, but you were getting with it. Tell us about your introduction to it, because I know for me, Rob, I grew up loving baseball writing. Like, baseball writing was it. You know, reading Ed Lynn, his Leo DeRocher book, and sports writers I thought were the cool, funny guys, and all that. So, like, before we get into some things that might be perceived as negative, let's start off. What were you reading? What did you think of your early baseball writing that you were bringing in?
Oh, wow. That's a big question. When I was a kid, I was obsessed with sports, generally, like a lot of us were. And I read the local paper, morning and evening. This was back when you had to get the evening paper to see the box score for the previous night's game, if it was on the West Coast, which was kind of fun. And Sports Illustrated, that was it. And I was religious about all of them. And then everything changed in 1984 when I went to college and walked into the university bookstore and saw this book, the Bill James Baseball Abstract. Never heard of Bill, opened the book, and knew immediately that this was for me, that I had to read this book. I don't know what it was, but I knew immediately that it was something I'd never seen before, a different way of looking at baseball. I bought the book and read it like within probably 48 hours. I devoured it, and things were never the same after that. Of course, there was a long period where you had to wait for the abstract to come out in the bookstore every spring to get that sort of writing, because it wasn't in the mass media anywhere. And that was frustrating. It also made March and April a lot of fun, as you went to the bookstore every single day to see if the abstract finally came in.
I know you think about like what you have to go through, what you had to go through then, that now you just have so many things to collect. Anyway, Boog, what about you? Give us a little background.
Sports fan as well. When I was young, my mom would hang the score on my doorknob so that when I got up, it was the first thing that I saw.
That's hardcore.
But I grew up a Phillies fan, and I still can remember my grandparents going on a cruise, and I didn't understand what a cruise was, so they explained it to me, and they just went through this whole thing. You go on a ship, you go different places, here's all the stuff that's on the ship, and when it was done, the only thing I wanted to know was, well, how do you get the box scores? And they looked at me and said, you don't. I've never been on a cruise in my life. Seriously. My introduction was this guy. I was given Bill James Abstract and read it, and as a baseball fan, I still have them, but I would say that when I really got hooked was reading Rob. I probably have, I'd say, 50 of your early columns printed at home and saved. I think I said it yesterday with Brian. It was just as simple as this. I grew up the same way everybody did in understanding concepts about baseball, and Rob would write and address certain concepts, and I just couldn't come up with a better argument, and I was just captured. And that was really my introduction.
Yeah, you know.
Well, so I came to this country in 1986 as a 7-year-old and from Germany and Jamaica. I felt like an outsider, and baseball was an immediate way to sort of connect with the kids around me, and baseball cards in particular. And then I found that I had an aptitude for figuring out which players were good, and getting those cards early, and making obscene trades that today those people, if they remember, are mad at me about. So I knew that I knew I loved baseball, and I knew that I thought about it a little bit differently than some people, but it was Rob Neyer's column, and it was the. I loved the original writing, but one of the things I really loved was that you read so much, and you linked to all the great stuff, and I think that's super important, especially for people in this room, to be able to read something and then follow it, and follow the links, and follow it to the deepest part. Because anytime I'm into something, I was one of those kids that just was a collector, and anytime I got into something, I was way into it. So, yeah, it was your call.
I tell you, I was, I used to get I remember when the Red Book and the Green Book became available to fans. I thought it was like the greatest thing ever. Like, wow, we get what the real sports writers get. Like, it was fantastic. My introduction to it was Total Baseball, with John Thorne and Pete Palmer, and they had a chapter on sabermetrics, and then I got to Bill James. And it took me a while to get there, but eventually, yeah, it blew my mind, all of it. And it taught me how to think, not just how to think about baseball, and how to challenge everything and think critically. I wrote a whole book on it. And the book really I was fascinated. Start with you. Why do you think there was such resistance in the mainstream media to sabermetric thought?
I don't know. I mean, now it seems kind of ridiculous because all writing almost now is infused with data. And we've gotten to a point now where you read on any subject and they kind of have this mentality of, let's say provable things, and let's try to prove the things we say. It's kind of the genie's out of the lamp for me. Like I don't know why. I can't go back.
I mean, I would say I've described baseball this way. I think that anytime the answer to the question is because we've always done it that way, it's never good enough, and baseball is loaded with that. Loaded with it. And it's a conservative sport by nature. I just think that it's one of those things where people get indoctrinated and or brainwashed into a certain way of thinking because somebody told them that, and then it takes a while to change the tide, regardless of the fact that the proof is there. So, what is it? It's like the people that once they discovered the Earth was round, the people that thought it was flat, you didn't really change their minds. Like, they just died.
Right. Right. Yeah.
I'll keep it positive the rest, don't worry.
No, I think there's a quote on that, like, the problem is actuarial. Right. You wait till them to go. All right, so Rob, you're a little older, man. You tell us, because you've observed all this stuff. I'm not saying he's older, closing to death. I'm saying he's a little older and he has more perspective. For the record, I'm older than he is, so I'm as well.
Well, I mean, I think that Boog nailed it. It's just when you've been doing something the same way, whether it's playing baseball or writing about baseball or anything else, any field, if someone comes along after 20, 30 years and says you've been doing it the wrong way, what's your natural reaction going to be? It's not going to be, oh, you tell me then how I should be doing it, and I'll spend a year studying. Nothing works that way.
It's funny, we talked yesterday, Boog and I, about, I find like there's really not much Saber hate going on, but wow, I lived through it. I mean, I really lived through it. I was right in the middle of it. And then reading about it, I was just always incredulous. And that's why I got so feisty about it. I didn't mean to be feisty. Well, maybe I meant to be feisty, but I didn't expect to get that way. But I was incredulous as to the resistance to just perfectly sound information, especially on television. Why do you think, Rob, that I mentioned to Boog, like the last guys to jump on board are the guys who are calling the games, who are in the weeds, pitch by pitch by pitch? So what's your take on that?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't. I should defer to Boog because he works with these guys. But I think the real issue on the broadcast is not the play-by-play guys. I think it's the analysts, the ex-players in particular. They seem incredibly resistant, and the reasons for that are obvious. They spent decades being told that what matters is not the data, not the generation that's now in the booth. They were told that the way to succeed is to do what your coaches tell you and hustle and all these other things that have nothing to do with numbers. And I mean, on your network, I was watching a couple weeks ago, and Jon Sciambi said, I love the numbers, but, and then he spent 3 minutes talking about how much he hates the numbers. And Jon Sciambi is regarded as one of the smarter analysts out there. So and they're not all like him, obviously. There are some analysts who really do buy into the numbers, but I don't think we're going to see a real sea change in the booth until the Zach Greinke generation is in the booth. And then all of a sudden, there's gonna be a huge change in the discourse. But we're just not there yet because those guys are still playing.
Boog?
I think part of it is access to on-field people. So the guys that are doing it every day are around coaches and players, and there's this idea that is really important, and that is, look, baseball people can see stuff that I can't see, but one of the things you've got to be able to discern is that they can't eyeball results. So when you go to a coach and you say, why is Ryan Braun struggling this year? And they say, he's getting fewer fastballs because Prince Fielder isn't hitting behind him. Not interested, because I can look. And there's so many things like that we took as gospel, that if they said this result was happening, we just accept it. And now we can look on our own. So I'm still interested in the things that they can see and their thoughts on why, but anything that they're just eyeballing data, that's where I think there's the fail, and I think that at times there still is, from both analysts and play-by-play guys, that when someone on the field says, this is what is happening, we just default to a place of saying, they're on the field, they know.
I think it's possible that it's a little bit further away from us than we think that this change is going to happen in the booth. And the reason I think about this, I think that like numbers represent management to players a lot of times. Numbers represent someone trying to put a number on you, put a wins above replacement number, basically reduce you to one stat. And I think just now we're starting to see front offices that are better at liaising with the players and putting people from the front office like on the coaching staff and having them around, having guys like Sam Fuld around, because that bridges that gap. And then now I'm starting to have players sort of tug at my sleeve when the interview's done and ask me like about spin rate, because they want to know how they can use it. How can I use this to get better? And the more that we do that, the more I think there'll be sort of a healthy relationship between front offices and players, and players who become analysts and the numbers.
I remember doing MLB Now the first year when I was doing it with Harold Reynolds, and we interviewed, I forget, it may have been even like Steve Sachs, I think Diamondbacks base running coach. And I'm thinking, here we go, Harold and the good old boy and all that stuff. And Steve Sachs was locked in. Like, I was stunned. Now, this is already 6 years ago. Like, and again, you go to find the smart people. They're everywhere. But that's where I thought, oh, my God, like these coaches who used to just sit and spit and do all that stuff, I said, wow, they're studying. They're looking. Like, their job depends on it. And so many of these coaches now, I mean, we're talking about the Diamondbacks, the pitching strategist, hitting strategist, on top of the coaches. But even the coaches, I have to say, I'm very impressed by the level of knowledge of most of these guys in the business now.
Yeah, I mean, there are hitting coaches, major league hitting coaches that ask me for whatever the most recent research, and they're definitely reading things that people are presenting at these conferences and the things that are out there, because they feel like they need to, incorporate anything they can. So there's definitely that is starting to happen, and it just needs to. There's a little bit of the players need to have that feeling. Like I worked with Yonder Alonso, and it was like, he was like, tell me about launch angle, and I was like, just hit it over the second baseman's head. That's launch angle. And he was like, oh yeah, that's better than hitting it at the second baseman. Why would I
Somebody please
practice
tweet that immediately. Eno Sarris, quote, just hit it over the second baseman's head.
So, yeah, like translating and getting that better relationship, I think is on the way.
From a game standpoint, the other thing, and BK, we talked about this yesterday, it's not just the people in the booth. You got to remember, on a TV crew, there are 30 people. And so when we're getting ready, my first game for TV, I have games next week, but I think I have Washington and Houston on the 21st. There's someone working on a graphics package, and they probably already started. Now, again, on Wednesday night, my producer, Jeff Dufon, and our group, they're savvy, and they know the type of stuff that I'm interested in. But the amount of people participating in the information and the collective, it's a lot of people. Mm-hmm. So it's not just, myself or the analyst that has to be on board. There are a lot of other people that have to be locked in and really have an understanding of why we're going to do it this way, or we're going to get a lot of, Bryce Harper's been good because RBIs or whatever. And so it's not just us in the booth. Right. Again, there are graphics and visual support and that type of thing. So I hate to say it, but I think that Eno's right. That I think it's going to take a little longer than we probably want or think.
Well, we at MLB Network now, I think it is easier because all we do is baseball. We had a whole research staff there ready to unleash a lot of this stuff, but the analysts were only interested in what they were interested in. And as I was able to get there and build my own boards, right, which is what I was used to, like, hey, let's do the OPS plus leaders, let's do the weighted runs created plus leaders, let's whatever it is, I just put it. Let's speak the language that we're speaking. Those boards started to live in other places, and I still vividly remember seeing Harold Reynolds and Matt Fiskerson there, and there was like a weighted runs created plus leaders, and I was like, oh my God, on Hot Stove, like there it is, like it or not, there it is. And then once Dan Plesac just started using his park adjusted ERA, like I said, of course I would want that. Yeah. But you're right, there is something about the producers, the graphics packages where people are on board. So to that, like at MLB Network, a lot of it was from the ground up. And once it was released, then you'll see, on MLB Tonight, a lot of these just park-adjusted boards or leader boards that we try to, categorize players using the numbers that we use. All right, so we solved that. All right. Now here's something in television it's still, things haven't changed. It is amazing that what do TV executives still want? Peyton Manning and A-Rod. Right, and great players, just like Joe Namath. I think Joe Namath did Monday Night Football. There's lots of top athletes got the positions in TV. Again, I've gotten used to it on my show, been able to get analysts on TV, actual analysts. Anybody can jump in on this. What do you make of television getting to a point where, of course you want players, but how about some analysts also on TV and maybe on some of the bigger games to do some instant analysis?
Yes. No, it also frustrates me that we get to the World Series and they bring in this crew, and you had these two teams that had their own crews, all year, and it's, sometimes you're like, well, why don't you get somebody off of that's seen them all year and put them up there? I think there are frustrating things in TV, but you have to remember that there are also a lot of people who don't watch all year, who show up just for the World Series. Mm-hmm. So that's not going to be, your network is going to be in the front because those are the people that watch baseball every day and want the deep dives. But, when it comes to the national crew and the World Series crew, I think, that's going to be the laggard. That's going to be the last place to see change.
I will tell you, I probably disagree with you a little bit on that, even though I've done teams and I'm a national guy. I think it goes both ways. I have found, and I'm sure it would aggravate some people, but being around team personnel, there's a forest and trees thing that happens. So you'll go to Team X and talk to their broadcasters, and they're like, man, our offense, it's so inconsistent. Yeah, man, you're second in runs per game and first and on base. You're fine. Yeah, but we leave too many guys on base. That's because you get a lot of guys on base. I'm serious, though. And because I'm not living it day in and day out, and they've just come off a game where they've been held to 1 run and 14 lobs, and they're just like, God, we're so frustrating. And I come in and I'm like, man, you guys are good. So do you understand what I'm saying?
No,
like,
yeah,
I
totally,
think that
totally.
but again, I get your point. There every day there are intricacies and things that the national guy I'm going to work my butt off, but there are things that seeing it on a day in, day out basis, I get it. But I also think that there's a counter to that.
Well, every time I write about Joey Votto.
Yeah, that's right.
There's like a crew in Cincinnati. He's like, he's terrible. I've had to mute like a bunch
Yes.
of people.
Rob,
Stop walking.
Yeah, like he's not terrible. He's one of the best players ever.
Well, this makes me think about the Fox postseason shows, because when I was there, they would use C.J. Nitkowski quite a bit on TV until the postseason. All of a sudden, he shipped out, and they bring in Pete Rose and Alex Rodriguez. Now, they were good at what they did, but C.J. was a better analyst, technically, than anybody else they had. But there's Frank Thomas, there's Pete Rose, there's Alex Rodriguez, and as a fan, I like C.J. personally, but as a fan of good analysis, and that was frustrating. And I don't think that the people who make those decisions, I doubt if they have any raw numbers that say we'll get better ratings if we bring in Frank Thomas. Now, Pete Rose is different because everybody knows who Pete Rose is. But if we bring in Frank Thomas, do we get better ratings than if we have CJ? I don't know. I kind of think nobody knows. Personally, I'd rather have the better analyst, the guy who's been doing it all season. But that's TV. And Brian, that better than anyone how that business works.
Right.
I don't think that's ever going to change.
Well, I think it's when the audience demands it. I think a lot of things have changed. It's really been accelerated over the last few years, unfortunately, with the demise of newspapers, the rising technology, and the ability just to, on Twitter, there's Eno's column, there's Ken Rosenthal's, Joel Sherman wrote something on this, boom, 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 and you just collect all your smart guys. And that's a pleasure, and that is now taking over. That seems like that's the dominant thread of how we digest the game, I would say. And not only that, again, I wrote in my book, I used to wait for Bill Madden's Cooperstown column, his Hall of Fame column. He'd write it around Christmas time. I'd be waiting for it. Now, you can get all this good Hall of Fame stuff every single day. So in a lot of ways, I guess we should be happy. Like, we are in a certain respect, like a golden era of being able to, find, good analysis on the internet.
Well, I would say, I wrote a story a year or so ago about this, but there's never been a better time to be a baseball fan or a consumer of 15 years ago when all the games started showing up on television, on DirecTV or whatever, the extra innings package, that was a highlight. At that point, it had never been better because you could see any game you wanted to. And if you're a baseball fan, what more could you want? But now, with so many great beat writers and so many blogs, it's a tremendous time to be a consumer. Obviously, we've also lost some things. You're always going to lose something. And I could identify some places where I think baseball writing could be a lot better. But overall, there's never been a better time to be a reader. So I think I don't know how we can get better than we are now. Really, if we just maintain this, given the economic models, if they could just stay as good as it is now, I think we should be thrilled.
And the reason that we're all here, I made this point to you yesterday, BK, baseball's led the way, for the other sports. And I would maintain, and it's subjective, but baseball's ahead of the other sports in terms of the amount of smart coverage that you have the ability to get relative to, and you get it in baseball too, but still in hoops and in football, this guy's a winner and he makes winning plays. Kill me. But seriously, so we're sitting here and I want to see it keep getting better, and I think it's great right now, but baseball's led the way in terms of smart coverage in other sports, and I think if you walk it back for a second and just take it in, you realize that it's the coverage you're getting is pretty good, and I would say that it is at a higher level, in my opinion, than I know they do it in the NBA, and I know they do it in football as well. But it is more common and more pervasive in this sport. That's my opinion.
Right, no doubt. My opinion, anyway. Just to touch on TV for a moment, I know we've done what we call a SABR cast, which I kind of blanch at now. I don't want to do a baseball game called the SABR cast, but you got to brand it with something. I would hope that we would morph into kind of just a regular game cast with what we do in our showcase game. We ask this question all the time, our producers, and we're all together and we say, what do you think people want? Like, I mean, there's a lot of times where I just enjoy, Don Orsillo, Hawk Harrelson calling a game. Just chill. Just call pitches. Chill. Sometimes I just like that. And then there's also, I'll be watching like David Cohn on Yes Network, and I'll say, that's a good point. Hey, that's a good point. I didn't think of that. And I found myself, oh, wow, here's someone telling me something all the time. This would be nice. So I wonder where the sweet spot is in that. Not overwhelming with information, enjoying the game, but getting things that you can learn.
I was actually wondering, I think people like to yell. That's what Twitter has taught me. So I'm wondering, like, if we did get that perfect SABRcast, like, do we lose something because we'd have nothing to yell about anymore? Just a thought.
There's always stuff to yell about. Yeah.
It's another.
What do we think the audience? What do we think the audience wants? Not this audience.
I mean, you're amazing at it.
What do we think the audience
You're
wants?
amazing at kind of being able to do both.
I mean, that's what I'm trying. I want it to be smart and interesting, and I also want it to be fun. I mean, that's really what my goal is. And yeah, some of the time during it, you're trying to let it breathe and just call pitches. And it's obviously different radio versus TV. My number one job on the radio is to paint the picture, and my responsibility is to let the listener know what is happening, and then from there, and doing that as efficiently as possible, lead Chris towards interesting stuff.
How often do you, and then in your own head, how often do you find like, oh, I've got an exit here, I'm going to go off on this, and you think, nah, just call the game? Like, how often do you make that decision where something will spark in your head, and you're thinking, this is not the place?
Yeah, you have stuff that's prepared. Absolutely, it happens. You have good things that are prepared, and you realize that you'll just be trying to hammer it home. And I'm guilty of it still. I mean, I've been doing this for 20 years, and let me ask you a question with 2 outs. How dumb am I? Like, literally and like it's something, obviously, if, Vince Scully's doing the game, the hitter will foul off enough pitches so that he can finish the point.
Magically.
That's the way it works. But for me, I'm not usually that fortunate. So I'm still guilty of trying to stuff things in, but yeah, I try and edit myself so that you're not suffocating a broadcast.
Rob, what do you like to listen to? What do you think the audience wants? Where's that sweet spot?
I don't have any idea what the audience wants. I don't think anybody has any idea. That's the thing. I mean, I've heard so many times broadcasters say, well, I'd like to do this stuff, but the audience isn't ready for it. How do you know the audience isn't ready for it? Nobody's run out there doing surveys of what the audience is ready for. I think the audience is ready for almost anything if the right person is giving it to them. And, Boog is maybe the best example I've ever heard of being able to slide in the smart analysis that maybe nobody's ever heard before. This stuff isn't super complicated. I mean, when you talk about pop time, this is not a complicated concept. Anybody who's ever watched 5 baseball games would understand what that is. Maybe they're not familiar with the nomenclature, but give them a 10-second explanation, and they've got it. And now they've got it forever. And I think that what distinguishes Boog from most broadcasters, it's not that Boog's a better guy, although I think he's a great guy. He seems like a pretty good guy. I don't know enough broadcasters. But because of how you came to understand the game, you simply, I think, I shouldn't presume, but you simply believe that part of your responsibility as a broadcaster is to impart the things that you know about baseball. And that's what most broadcasters want to do. It's just that Boog grew up knowing more things, or these things anyway, than most broadcasters. And I think a great game analyst, if it's an ex-player, is the one who can impart the things that they learned as players. And if they can mix in a few metrics like David Cohn does, all the better. I don't require that from an analyst. But there are too many analysts who don't even impart the things they learned as players. Maybe they didn't learn the right things, I don't know, but if you can do both things, great. If you can do one, that's fine too, but there are far too many analysts who don't do either. And those are the ones who completely lose me. And there are a lot of broadcasts that I literally can't listen to, or broadcasters, because they just don't teach me anything, whether it's the metrics or the playing experience. You got to give me one or the other, or why are we here?
Yeah, my TV's muted a lot.
My
TV's muted a lot.
I will tell you, when I do radio with Chris Singleton, Chris has a really solid understanding of sabermetric concepts. And one of the things that's really fun is the idea. Chris was hacktastic as a player. And you can lead him into a conversation that he understands now. This is him saying, he understands now much more clearly why he wasn't that good than he did then. He said, I wish someone had taught me strike zone judgment when I was a kid, and he even explained to me while I was firing up a 312 OBP why, that's a problem. But he gets it. So, and when you're able to have that interaction with someone who is in it, I think it's interesting.
Right. We've had at the network a lot of new guys come through, and it's the same process where, and I understand whether it's Mark DeRosa, Sean Casey, Carlos Pena, where, no man, you guys were foot soldiers. You're not seeing it from up on the hill like the general. Of course you're not. You're in there in the battle. Pena, I think, is a different example because he really studies now the latest science of hitting, and so he can geek out on that, and we're going to see more and more players do all that stuff. So you'll see the change. We're going to take questions, so write them on the cards. I got one more topic, and then we'll take your questions. So feel free, anything you want. We're all here. There has been a wave lately of sentiment that because of the way the market has turned out, that sabermetric inquiry, sabermetric mindset is anti-player, because a lot of what I've done, what a lot of people do is, that deal's terrible. That deal they'll regret, because that's kind of the way it's been. But do you get that sense that at some point, like that echo chamber of terrible deal, don't pay this guy, it becomes anti-player?
Like I said in yesterday's panel, sabermetrics is really about efficient use of resources. And really, there should be, if it's not going to be free agents, there should be another place that they can spend. Maybe there's a CBA problem that doesn't allow teams to spend in other places. And so I was saying maybe development is one of the few places you can spend a bunch of money. And maybe that's what we're seeing. But I think that's actually sort of exciting, because if you do spend on development and you're now bringing more sports science to the players, and you're bringing stats in a way that's like, hey, these stats are here to help you get better. Like, we're going to now use VR to show you what your expected results are on these swings. And then now when we talk to you about launch angle, you know what we're talking about. Hitting it over the second baseman's head. We're not talking about it in weird ways. We're not talking down to you. Now you think all this science and stats is designed to make you a better player. And then we'll have, then I think those players that understand that stats are not anti-player.
What do we think? Again, on the larger economic scale.
Well, I love talking about this stuff and could go on, but to this point, if you buy into the recent story that Ben Lindbergh did, the players' share of the revenues have remained steady for a number of years. So it isn't as if all of a sudden the players are keeping more of the money than they've ever kept before. It seems to be roughly on par with what's happened in the past, and also on par with the other sports. So I don't buy yet into the notion that the numbers are all of a sudden keeping the players from being paid what has been considered their fair share. I did come to think a few years ago that the owners were running out of ways to spend money on player salaries. And this winter has just been the most extreme example of that. And yes, player development, but there's only so much you can spend on VR, especially when you're talking about millions and millions of dollars that are in that pool of money that's to be spent. I think ultimately they're just going to keep giving money to more players, just younger players. I think that's the ultimate goal, going to be the ultimate goal for the teams, because the players won't allow, I don't think, the share of revenues to drop much further than it is now, which means you have to pay the players more, the younger players. But that's an efficient use of resources, because if you do that, I mean, I think one of the things that's led to the free agent freeze is it's in part due to the sabermetrics and the writing, because you don't want to be the one who signs Albert Pujols or Ryan Howard to that contract 4 or 5 years later and have people on the internet making fun of you every single day. Because that's happened, and not just those two guys. And I think that there's been a culture change where, even though we have the money, Arte Moreno is not going to go broke because of Albert Pujols' contract. The Phillies aren't going to go broke. 20, 30, 40 years ago, there were many people saying, teams are about to go broke. This is going to happen because of free agency. Well, now we all know it's not going to happen, that no team's in danger of going broke because of all the money coming in. But you still don't want to be the guy who's spending $25 or $30 million for a player who's contributing nothing to your bottom line. I think that's a big part of the culture change. But it also means you can justify pretty easily paying young players a lot more than they're being paid now.
Boog.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to unpack. I think that as far as this group, I would say, the starting point in terms of your question, I do think that at times there's a collective negativity. I mean, there is. I think at times it can turn into, we're smart, you're dumb, and I'm in the, but I think so. I think tone is important at times. So I understand it, maybe why at times the players perceive it as anti-player, because it's not always delivered with good tone. But I don't believe that is truly in fact, much the other way. I think that if you were to, I think that all the people, that's the one part that's misunderstood, is that the people here love baseball, man. They love baseball. They throw shoes at the TV just like everybody else, but they like numbers too. And a lot of people don't understand that. But I think tone is a big part of it.
My editor at Fangraphs, Carson Sestouli, always made a really big deal about trying to find a way, even when you were criticizing, to make the story kind of uplifting in some way. And he always thought that sort of cynicism, and we weren't going to be Fire Joe Morgan. We weren't gonna just attack and tear down. It was always about building something. That was something I really respected in him as an editor. So I do think that starting with a baseline of these guys are amazing at what they do. They're really, really good, and we can still investigate how maybe Adam Wainwright can return to form a little bit and admit that he wasn't very good last year and he was hurt. But come at it as in, let's build this guy up rather than tear him down.
Where it hit me was not as much when I said, the Yu Darvish contract, and then people were, getting after me about why this guy was underpaid and blah, blah. I'm thinking, you're worried about him making $144 million. But then I tweeted out, what a great deal for the Mets, getting Todd Frazier, for that deal. And actually, I've worked with Todd Frazier. I would have liked to have seen him made more money. Yeah. So it's a great deal. And at the same time, wow, he's kind of underpaid. I thought he should have done a little better. So I find that sometimes. And plus, I think he is a pretty good player. So yeah, great deal. I've been in that mindset for a long time. Great deal, great deal, great deal.
Great deal for whom?
It's always for the team, right? But then when you say, what a great deal for Albert Pujols. Now, in the next 4 years, it's true too. All right, let's get some questions here. Here we go. Questions. You have time for a few more if you want to get some in here. With Aaron Boone, an analytics geek named manager of the Yankees. Is he an analytics geek? Yeah, I hadn't found that. He doesn't know. I hadn't found that. What's your reaction this? It's a broader question too. Your reaction in ESPN and MLB Network studios about more analytics in broadcasting. I mean, the Boone signing, I was surprised by to go right from the booth, to the manager's job. That surprised me. Any take on Aaron Boone?
I think that managers it's like the largest part of the job is actually managing personalities and creating sort of cohesiveness as a group. And that's why it's so hard to analyze how good managers are, because you'll take Joe Torre and put him on one team and he's not the right fit. And then you take Joe Torre and you put him on the Yankees and they're all veterans and he's chill and everything's fine. That was perfect. You know, so I think it's about personalities really, and you know, I think analytics, soon speaking 2 languages, that's gonna get you to the door. That's the first thing that they ask you. It's not we hire him because he does analytics. All the managers are required to do that. Now it's the third thing is what's the fit with your personality in our clubhouse.
Aaron, I know very well. He has a real intuitive feel for sabermetric stuff. He does, and I mean he was excited to go to the Yankees to just learn even more. I mean, once I saw the list of candidates that were being interviewed and he was part of it, I thought he was going to get it.
I mean,
just
he's
did.
been here. You know, he's not. He may. I don't know about analytics geek, but he's been here.
Yeah. So
He's a geek.
Rob?
Well, I mean, I don't think we have any idea how well he's going to do because he's never managed before. And some of those guys work out, and some of them who have basically the same qualifications outwardly, the same resumes as Aaron Boone, haven't been successful. Or they've been successful for a year and then not successful. I mean, managing is still a black box unless someone's been incredibly successful in a situation and you can identify the reasons why. I think it would have been, you would have had a difficult case to make if you wanted to argue that Joe Madden would not be successful with the Cubs. But there aren't many Joe Maddens out there. There are like 1 or 2 per generation, basically.
And he also makes a lot of in-game mistakes. Like
He does.
a great
Absolutely.
manager who makes a lot of mistakes.
He does make mistakes, and I think that's what gets back to Eno's point about managing personalities, which, you know, after reading a book about the Cubs, Tom Verducci's book, I'm not blown away by Madden's managerial, his tactical acumen, but clearly connects with his players. And has almost everybody pulling on the same end of the rope, which is, again, probably the most important thing that a manager does by quite a bit.
But I did MIT Sloan Analytics Conference a couple of weeks ago. I was on the panel with Dusty Baker, incongruous, but you know, I have to say, Dusty did a great job. There's no question. They won back-to-back division titles. They cruised, and he brought in new oxygen into that room. So no, Dusty did a fantastic job.
I'd also tell you this, and it completely anecdotal, and I know, you know, he's known as, you know, slagging pitchers, that type of thing. It's really hard inside the game to find players who have played for Dusty Baker who will say bad things about Dusty Baker. It really is. And take that for what it's worth. I'm just telling you, my anecdotal experience is, I mean, it is rare that you encounter someone that's like, man, I hated playing for that guy.
Right. No, his communication is top notch, and the Nationals had said it for years. Another thing now, and it's funny because it's kind of the dream come true, like those who are doing writing and you start doing a blog and you develop a following, which you can do these days, and then you get hired by a team. And that's happened a lot. Dave Cameron is the most notable example recently. So what do we make of the siphoning of writing talent into the proprietary world of baseball?
I think it's awful for us, for readers, because not only do we first of all, we're losing good analysts. Again, as readers, we lose them to the teams. But I mean, I don't have any proof of this, but I do feel like oftentimes the writer is simply auditioning for a job with a major league team. That's not your job as a writer, unless your job as a writer for me is to entertain, educate me, not to audition for another job somewhere. And I think that one of the things that made Bill James so much fun to read and thus popular and thus influential was that he couldn't care less when he was writing what people thought about him. Or he probably did, but he just couldn't help himself. That's how Bill is. And that's how I was the first 3 or 4 years I was writing at ESPN. It wasn't until later when I started actually going out and doing interviews and talking to people and where I better not be too awful toward Allard Baird here because I might want to interview him next spring. There is something to be said for access, no question, but there's no shortage of people with access. There is a shortage of people who are willing to be brutally honest, and I think if you're auditioning for a job with a major league team, it's or a media organization or a big media organization, it's difficult to be brutally honest, and I think we have lost a little bit there.
Guys?
I said no once without checking with my wife, and she said, okay, but next time if you get an offer, like, please talk to me. And I was like, why? You don't want to move to some random ass city, and you don't want to do this. And she said, you don't want to lose me for 170 days a year. You don't want to do this. And she said, no, but I know you want to see their data set. I was like, yeah, you're probably right.
Yeah, I don't really have anything to add on that one. I mean it's interesting as far as I remember being at a conference, man, I'm not sure how long ago, but I think Bill was asked about it in terms of, and he said that because there are just still so many great minds out there publicly that you're still going to be churning out good, thoughtful stuff. I hadn't really thought about what Rob just said in terms of purposefully writing it. It's nuanced, I get it, but I still think that there's good stuff out there and will continue to be.
There was a big high-profile situation with Omar Minaya and Adam Rubin. Do you remember this? Omar Minaya accused Adam Rubin of lobbying for a front office job in a press conference.
Yep.
In front of everybody. So when you said that just sort of jarred that memory loose.
Hey, one last thing, and Rob and I, we were talking about it yesterday a bit. It's kind of now a new homogenization of the culture, to use George Will's term, of the GMs now that are throughout the game. That it's Ivy League central, and it's good because those guys never get a break. So it's good to see them. Thank you, everybody. And it's funny because I was always pushing for more smart people into the game. And how come this guy with the jutting jaw has this job and not the guy that clearly knows what's going on? And yet now it seems to have swung very far the other way. Where are we on that? Rob, you start.
Well, of course we want bright people running the teams. If you're in this room, you're probably like me. Your sort of fantasy was that baseball would be run smartly, efficiently, and all those things. I want everything to be run efficiently. It just makes logical sense to me. So of course we want the baseball executives to all be smart and efficient. They can't all be equally smart and efficient, but more than they were, and that's obviously happened. You don't need to have almost literally half of your GMs from Ivy League schools to be smart and efficient. I think there are, two more from, is it Amherst, which is sort of an Ivy League school? I mean, so it is roughly half. Now, how many other fantastic institutions of higher learning are there in this country? You could get rid of all the Ivy League guys and draw from all the rest of them and still be at least, quite frankly, probably more smart and efficient. If you think about it, you're essentially ruling out 90+% of all your universities, all the talent from those. It doesn't make any sense. That's not efficient. Drawing all of your GMs from 8 schools, that's inefficient. That's the issue I have with it. There's a real problem here. If the point is to be smart and inclusive, that's not happening right now. I mean, baseball should be addressed. I don't know how you address it, but it's a real problem.
Yeah, I agree with Rob. It's complicated. I think you want smart and efficient, but there are other qualities that go into running a team, and we talked about the idea yesterday of empathy and connecting with people. I mean, that applies to the general manager as well. Your ability to manage people and connect is important. But again, I think, for what you're talking about, if you were to just, you need to figure out a way to try and find, I think, more minority candidates is one of the things that you'd look at. Or
somebody from a state teachers college. I mean,
sure,
again, the list goes on and on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and also just diversity of thought in terms of, like, You do see it because the teams with resources are doing weird things. I love to hear about weird things.
Weird things are good.
Yeah, like even though John Baker's white former player or whatever, he's not adding a lot of diversity. The way he thinks is very different, and so having a mental skills department where he's trying to find out ways to like give players confidence and putting them in ice baths, like full body ice baths, and talking to them about meditation and stuff. Like, yeah, we should do more of that.
Well, again, we're going to have there's a diverse perspective panel at 3:45, and it's funny as I was researching the book and trying to think of things. How did we get into this herd mentality? It's because everybody's from the same spot, thinking the same way, and it's funny how we haven't gotten there completely, obviously, but it's kind of gone that way, and you frequently don't have new ideas in the room unless you have someone who comes from another perspective other than the exact same one that you came from. Mm-hmm. So we do need more of that. How do you that's the question then. How does that happen? Like you would like it to naturally happen that teams looking for a competitive edge, you would want diverse thought.
It's a nice feeling to have that, but the way gatekeeping works is that it's hard to even get to the table. You actually have to, if you want to add that, you have to actually search it out, and you have to promote it. You have to do activities, and we're going to get this a little bit political because you're talking about like affirmative actions, and not everyone agrees on that sort of stuff. But I'm talking about like you have to search it out and you have to develop it, and you have to work on it. It's not something that you can just be like, oh, it'll come to us, right. We'll hear it, and if we like it, we'll do it. No, you have to actually sort of develop it.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that's interesting is that you get a lot of these guys from liberal arts backgrounds and, let's be honest, liberal backgrounds, and yet they get into these jobs and they still behave conservatively in many instances, as opposed to taking risks. Like it's still very risk averse, despite the fact that you have very enlightened people. So in terms of taking a chance or a risk towards something that weird, different. I'm with you, but it's still pretty rare, despite the fact that you have.
Well, you're never going to escape people being risk averse. Once you've got one of those jobs, the last thing you're going to do is take a huge risk and possibly lose it. What needs to happen is someone needs to conclude there's a competitive advantage to being more diverse.
Correct.
And not just in terms of
or a competitive advantage to taking some risks.
Right. That's right.
That's how I see the Giants offseason a little bit. They took some risks, when nobody else was. It's a zig. So I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to finish up by saying that that's how sabermetrics became such a huge part of baseball, as people realized that there was a competitive advantage here, and it was largely due to Moneyball, the book, because that changed the minds of so many owners. That's really where it started. It wasn't the GMs. GMs, most of them were already locked in to doing things the old way, but the owners were not. And the owners said to their GMs in many cases, I just read this book. Why didn't you read it first? Mm-hmm. Second, how do we start doing some of this stuff? And I think until you have essentially ownership deciding that we have to do some different things and look outside of it, it's the same old thing. They're locked into Ivy Leaguers who read Moneyball. Okay, that made sense for 10 or 15 years. What's the next thing? The next thing is not more of that. It can't be. It doesn't make any sense. There's no competitive advantage of doing the same thing everybody else is doing.
You see small cracks in it. I know, I wish I had could reference it and do proper attribution, but a story on the Philadelphia Phillies who hired, I believe, 3 females to work in different areas of player development. And it's like, yeah, of course, why not if someone is equipped to do that? So I think there are cracks, and maybe that's Matt Klentak, maybe that's Gabe Kapler, with a little more bold thinking that, hey, there's a lot of things that can be done here, and it doesn't have to be done, by, X white ball player. And I think we're getting to that. I'm sure there's frustration in this room by people trying to, get into baseball still. I think that still happens. But I think there's small improvements, but there needs to be a process of actually forcing teams to go and do that, or it is unlikely to take up the type of steam, that it needs to take. All right, We're done. Again, the diversity panel is later. Pete Palmer being honored here later as well. Thank you so much, everybody.